In the Naruto story, there's been countless Kekkei Genkais that have been underused, underwhelming, or were simply laid to rest in the background. One of those being Crystal Release. Today's video is going to be asking the question of what would happen if this ability was in the right hands of, well, the main character to get as much screen time as it possibly can and also get a little bit of that plot armor boost. So today's video, we're basically going to be throwing the ability at Naruto and seeing if anything at all would change in the Naruto story. And if you guys are excited for that, make sure to hit the like button. And also, if you guys go on to enjoy today's video and want to see the rest of the story, you can do so by becoming a member and joining the first tier of becoming a member. By doing that, you guys will get access to members only videos and you will be able to see the rest of this entire series on the channel before anybody else can. That said, let's get started.
Hey Ross, sauce it up.
Naruto, the Nine-Tails Jinchuriki, arguably the most hated character in the Hidden Leaf Village as of this current moment, would essentially be walking down, just seeing if he can, maybe potentially go into another owner's shop. Naruto would be doing so, and it's at this moment that Naruto would stumble across Ichiraku Ramen. When he ends up making his way there, Naruto goes inside and, goes on to be like, hey, how are you guys doing? He goes on to be his kind usual self. And suddenly when Naruto is eating said ramen, Naruto would get so excited by how good it tastes that Naruto awakens a Kekkei Genkai inside of him. Crystal Release. And in this story, Naruto is not going to be the second user of this, seeing as the first person to have ever used this ability was a filler character, so non-canon. So Naruto in this story is actually going to be the first user of Crystal Release ever in the Naruto universe. Much like Hashirama was the first wood style user, Naruto will be the first Crystal Release jutsu user. And when Naruto creates these crystals, Ichiraku and his daughter would see this and they would be shocked, asking Naruto how he did that. Naruto goes on to say that he has no idea, and from here Ichiraku looks to him and asks him if he can maybe replicate it. Naruto goes on to essentially try, but all he could have mustered at that one time was that one singular medium-sized crystal. Naruto looks towards Ichiraku as Ichiraku looks at Naruto and asks him if he can keep this crystal in exchange for the food. Naruto tells him of course, and he says if he can keep them coming, and Ichiraku smiles and then goes on to give Naruto like 2 more plates before the dude gets full and runs off home, as Ichiraku got his payment via crystals. Now I'm not sure if these crystals realistically would have a lot of value in the Naruto story, just due to the simple fact that, well, they are just crystals, and I'm not really sure if that's something that like everybody would exactly be willing to pay top dollar for. So I'm going to be saying that that's probably going to be the only times that I have Naruto actually use the crystal to actually be a means of payment. So this is kind of just going to be the one exception, right? That said though, Naruto, after performing this act, would go over to his house and begin trying to replicate it. He would spend weeks trying to do this, and eventually after he realizes he can't anymore, he would become so frustrated he slams his hand on his table. After doing so, Naruto would realize that he would have actually turned his entire table to crystal. And when Naruto sees this, he immediately decides that he's going to be running towards the direction of the Hokage. When he does so, he informs Hiruzen of his strange ability, and Hiruzen goes on to ask him if this is really true. Naruto tells him that he promises he's not lying, and tells him that even though he can't do it now, he did it at his house, and tells him that he has proof. He takes Hiruzen back to his apartment, and it's at this moment that Hiruzen would see the crystallized, how do I put this? The crystallized desk, right? Naruto, upon showing this to Hiruzen would be dumbfounded and tell Naruto that he has a Kekkei Genkai, telling Naruto to work on this ability and giving him about 4 scrolls to actually begin studying and trying to see if there's any way that he can actually activate his Kekkei Genkai. After Hiruzen learns of Naruto having a strange Kekkei Genkai, he would think to himself that it might potentially be linked to Kurama, but after giving it some thought and thinking back to how Kushina was, he realizes that that's definitely definitely not how this works. Naruto must have inherited it after being one of the first Namikaze and Uzumaki born, children. So after Naruto has this small little situation go down, Naruto ends up pretty much for the next following years working on his crystal release ability and trying to master it as best as he possibly can. This would eventually lead Naruto to a bunch of days where he essentially tries to convert things to crystal. He tries to make crystallized weapons, tries to make crystallized shuriken, tries to essentially transform other things into crystals, and even create crystal-like clones. Naruto, upon having this incredible ability, would try to do everything that he possibly can, but everything would be kind of derpy. His crystal clones would look very, very down, if you know what I'm saying, and his shurikens would be very not sharp, you know what I mean? So Naruto isn't exactly going down the best path currently, but after a few more years of training, I'm confident Naruto will be able to do something with his crystal release abilities. Naruto at this point would finally find himself in the academy, being told by Mizuki that there's actually a secret portion of the exam that could help him pass. Mizuki, after telling this to Naruto, would have a smirk on his face, and Naruto would go on to essentially go after the scroll of, the Forbidden Scroll. Once Naruto gets his hands on this, he goes on to learn the multi-shadow clone jutsu just like he would in the original, and use it to pretty much destroy Mizuki, beating the man to a pulp and throwing him into the, Hidden Leaf Village jail, I guess you could say. Following this situation, Naruto gets actually accepted into Team 7 just like he would in the original, and would end up meeting his teammates Sasuke, Sakura, and Kakashi Hatake the very next day. After, of course, Kakashi would be very, very late, right? Kakashi was taking his sweet time, and Naruto was just like, why you taking so long, bro? Like, why? Like, it says 7, come pick your team up at 7, not 12. Kakashi, he says he got lost on the path of life, and the team goes up to tell him, their goals and ambitions. After all is said and done, Kakashi would poof into smoke, and this is when Naruto would have a vein appear on his forehead, thinking that Kakashi didn't even have the guts to show up there himself. Instead, he sent a shadow clone, something that he could have probably done way, way ahead of time. And Naruto, after being angered by this, would decide to just let it go, going home and going on to essentially continue practicing a jutsu that Naruto has been trying to work on. It's heavily inspired by the Water Dragon Jutsu, something that Naruto read up on, seeing as this Naruto is a bit different than the one in the original. See, this Naruto isn't going to be going around flamboyantly rocking a orange jumpsuit. Instead, goes around in a all black, jaded looking dope outfit. Not only that, but Naruto's hairstyle is actually going to be a lot different than what he had in the original. Instead of having it spiked up, Naruto kind of has it falling down, similar to what his hair kind of looks like whenever it's wet. And his headband, instead of having it around his head, he would actually have it pretty much falling on his neck, kind of like Hinata has it. It's a pretty cool way of wearing it, I personally think, and just having it on your forehead, it just looks weird. That's just my personal opinion, but again, I'm just some random YouTube kid. Anyways though, what basically ends up happening following this is essentially they end up meeting Kakashi Sensei the very next day at the training grounds. When they end up meeting Kakashi Sensei, what ends up pretty much happening is nothing much, honestly. I mean, they go on to essentially be told about the bell test. Kakashi goes on to pretty much tell them that, okay, they can get started now. He whips out a book like an absolute savage and then looks towards their direction before saying, all right, 3, 2, and Naruto waits until he finally says 1, before suddenly Naruto slams his hands onto the ground and says, Crystal Dragon Jutsu! And this dragon comes out looking derpy. The second that Kakashi heard Dragon Jutsu, he immediately got on guard. But when he turned to see what Naruto had just created, Kakashi could not help but start dying laughing. Because what he saw before him was essentially it looked like a dragon with Down syndrome, pretty much. Like, the dragon was crooked, the face looked goofy, the dragon itself was stubby and short, and Naruto was pretty much extremely embarrassed as Kakashi was laughing, and Naruto would just look to Kakashi before saying, "Stop laughing!" He suddenly then went on to create a sort of crystallized scythe And after he does this, he runs towards the direction of Kakashi. And Kakashi would lift an eyebrow at this, thinking that Naruto did not just use any hand seals. And Naruto would rush in towards the direction of Kakashi before swinging the scythe at his direction. Kakashi would dodge very quickly, take out a kunai, and begin to essentially dodge all of these attacks that Naruto was throwing at him. Eventually though, Naruto would hold a hand sign out in front of himself and say multi-shadow clone jutsu, as a bunch of shadow clones would come out with their very own scythes. And as soon as Kakashi sees this, he realizes, yep, you got to take this a bit seriously. So Kakashi would jump into the air and do like 7 hand seals before finally saying water style water flood jutsu. I don't know if that's even a real thing, but you get what it is. It's water flood. It would go on to go down and pretty much destroy all the multi-shadow clone jutsu clones that Naruto would have created, leading Kakashi to finally have a second of, well, relaxation and be able to breathe calmly, knowing that he was able to take down Naruto relatively easily. Naruto, after seeing this, would decide to take out one more of his cards before thinking that if this doesn't work, then nothing will. He rushes in towards Kakashi and begins trying to crystallize Kakashi himself, but Kakashi's much too fast and the process of crystallizing somebody isn't something instantaneously. So instead, once Naruto closes the gap small enough, he pretty much ends up weaving 2 hand signs before suddenly a ton of spinning like shuriken things would come flying at him, and they would look more like saucers instead of shuriken, mind you. They end up rushing towards the direction of Kakashi, and once Kakashi sees these things, he widens his eyes as he substitutes out of there, and Sasuke would be right there waiting for Kakashi to eventually show up near him. Once Sasuke sees his opportunity to actually strike at Kakashi, he would do so and immediately jump down the tree as he says, "Fire style, fireball jutsu," as he shoots a gigantic fireball at Kakashi, who's like, "What? Genin?" But then suddenly Naruto appears right behind him and tries to essentially snag one of the bells. He grabs one and then rolls out of the way, and Kakashi would then look towards his direction before telling him that he did a pretty good job. He would then look towards Sasuke and get serious before knocking Sasuke and then tracking Sakura down using Kenjutsu on her and taking her out very, very swiftly. Following this, what Kakashi goes on to do isn't exactly much of a shocker to me or anybody else really, because what Kakashi goes on to essentially do is pretty much tie Sasuke and Sakura to the post. After Naruto gets his filling of the food, Naruto grabs another one of the plates and looks at Sasuke and Sakura as he tells them that they seem pretty hungry. Sasuke goes on to be proud and say he's not hungry at all, and Naruto looks to him before saying, "Oh really, you're not hungry?" Sasuke looks to him, then looks away, and his stomach begins growling as Sasuke damns himself, and suddenly he would see Naruto before him just feeding him. And Sasuke kind of feels a bit happy by this, but also a bit ashamed because Naruto's the one feeding him. Suddenly, after Naruto gives Sasuke half, he would then turn towards Sakura and tell her that the team has to be at full strength, as he feeds her, and suddenly Kakashi ends up arriving, going on to scare Naruto, causing him to drop the food and then be told that they passed, as he then goes on to explain that those who go on to abandon the mission and break the rules are scum, but those who abandon their teammates, well, they're worse than scum. And after Kakashi does this, the entire team would be confused, but would inevitably just agree to being part of Team 7. Following this, with 2 weeks worth of D-rank missions that would be extremely useless, and suddenly after these 2 weeks, Naruto would finally speak up to Hiruzen, asking for a higher ranked mission. Hiruzen would of course oblige, and he would actually tell Tazuna to walk into the room, as Tazuna would do so and begin to essentially be slurring his words, since Tazuna is, well, extremely drunk. Once Tazuna enters the room, he goes on to say, "Raja." He begins to essentially begin disrespecting everybody who was in that room and side with him, and Naruto would pretty much not take too kindly to this, but would decide to just leave it alone, seeing as it shouldn't matter to him whether the client is disrespectful or not, that he's gonna get the mission done one way or the MFing other, okay? So basically what ends up happening is pretty much they all accept, and the very next day they end up meeting by the bridge. Or why do I always do that? I say by the bridge instead of by the village gates, which is where they actually meet. And following this, we basically get into about approximately 1 hour worth of traveling, or actually that's being generous. Yeah, 1 hour worth of traveling before suddenly they end up stumbling across a strange puddle in the middle of summer, mind you. So there should be no puddle, seeing as the heat would have most likely evaporated it. Kakashi looks towards the direction of this puddle and questions what's going on. And it's at this sudden moment that he finally gets his answer. Two demon brothers lunge out at him and seemingly kill Kakashi to Team 7. And once everybody else sees this, Naruto and Sasuke are both simply standing there wondering what they're gonna do next. Sasuke immediately jumps into action, and Naruto, seeing this act by Sasuke, would jump into action as well, actually going on to get a slight cut from one of the demon brothers with its poison laced thing, and Naruto would then go on to create two do you guys know how Batman has those little spikes on the sides of his arm? Pretty much imagine that, but like a gigantic spike that pretty much like connect from the top of his fist to the back of his like forearm thing, right? And it's like this gigantic knife thing. If you guys saw the filler, you guys know what I'm talking about. But he creates one of those and he then rushes at the shinobi, as he then goes on to pierce him and immediately send him flying down, knocking him down a peg or two. And after Naruto goes on to do this, he then pretty much looks to Sasuke, who nods back at him as Kakashi arrives and says that they did a pretty great job. Sakura immediately begins freaking out, like she probably most likely would, and it's at this moment that Kakashi would say, "So you guys handled yourselves pretty well out there. I wonder how you guys are going to handle yourselves moving forward," as he then goes on to look towards the direction of Naruto and, gives him a bit of a smile. Naruto looks to Kakashi, thanks him for that, and then goes on to essentially tell him that, they did their best and that, they tried pretty decently well. Kakashi goes on to, pretty much tell them that they have to keep going, and goes on to pretty much interrogate Tazuna about the real nature of today's mission, as Tazuna goes on to break and immediately start confessing everything, telling him that their village pretty much just didn't have enough money to pay for the true ranking of this mission, saying that, if he doesn't make it home to his grandson alive, he's going to be so sad, trying to guilt trip the team. And it unfortunately works, but, they end up going forward since all of them want to complete the C rank mission, and once they end up pretty much continuing going forward, they eventually end up stumbling upon Zabuza Momoichi, who throws a gigantic blade at their direction, which Kakashi tells everybody to dodge, and suddenly goes on to get trapped by the water prison jutsu. Nothing really changes there, but one thing that does change here is something that I'm about to pretty much kind of reveal to you guys, right? So we all know that in the original, after he traps Kakashi, he ends up making clones, right? Sasuke and Naruto would handle these clones, and after this, Kakashi would beg for them all to run, telling them that he failed them as a sensei and that he deserved what's coming to him. But Naruto goes on to say, no you don't, as he, pretty much goes on to weave one hand sign before him and shoots hundreds of shuriken-like things, saucers, at the direction of Zabuza. Zabuza's eyes would widen as he would wonder how a Geni knew such a jutsu, and he would actually have to be forced to let go of the water prison jutsu that Kakashi's inside of, leading Kakashi to land on the water and eventually reveal his Sharingan to Zabuza, as he then looks to him and tells him that the real battle starts now. He then goes on to shock Zabuza, making Zabuza believe that he can see into the future, as we then see a sight, a familiar one as that, as it's Haku who jumps in the way and pretty much ends up saving Zabuza from a Chidori that was about to be pretty much impaled into him. And suddenly, Kakashi falls to the ground and is pretty much forced to be carried to Tazuna's house, where Naruto finally goes on to meet Inari, Tsunami, and goes on to finally realize the horrible state of this, village. Once Naruto sees all this, he begins to feel kind of bad for them. And once Inari opens his mouth, Sasuke, kind of begins to stop feeling bad for them. Sakura says, "Oh, well, he's just a kid." And Naruto could not care less how old Inari was, seeing as once Naruto was his age, he was dealing with the hatred of the entire village on himself. So not having a father and mother were the least of his problems. So Naruto doesn't exactly like Inari, but he also does understand somewhat that Inari is just a kid, and that Inari might have been a brat regardless of what his upbringing was, just due to the fact that Inari is, a kid. That said, we basically get this scene where Naruto goes on to continue training for the following couple of days until eventually Kakashi would wake up, and essentially we would see Kakashi go on to train Team 7 in tree walking while Naruto goes on to keep trying and perfecting his Crystal Dragon Jutsu. Once all is said and done, we get this incredible view and this amazing scene where we see Naruto finally successfully create a Crystal Dragon Jutsu. Naruto would jump up into the air with excitement, and after he performs this said jutsu, we see Haku, who's picking flowers, run up to Naruto. He goes on to talk to him, asking him if he has anything to protect. Naruto looks to Haku thinking, oh yo, she kinda bad, and Haku goes on to ask if he has anything to protect. Naruto says not really, and Haku says, shame, if you had something to protect, you'd be a lot stronger. Naruto thinks about this, and Naruto, he begins kind of spitting some game at Haku, right? He's like, oh, like, you know what I'm saying? Like, how do you know about all this? He begins kind of like spitting some mean game to Haku, right? And Haku looks back to Naruto, kind of smiles at him, continues talking to him for about a minute or two, before finally picking up his basket and beginning to walk away. Naruto would have a big smile on his face as Haku looks back and says, oh yeah, and also, I'm a boy.